Hello, my name's Adam from Vector 3D, designer of the VLMP 2, and welcome to this assembly guide. We're going to be starting with a disassembly as part of the upgrade guide for those looking to upgrade from the VLMP 1. If you're not looking to do an upgrade and instead just assembling, you can use the timestamps to skip forward to the assembly part. For this process, of course, you'll need your original VLMP, an upgrade kit to take it from V1 to V2, and a bunch of printed parts in your chosen base and accent colours. Lastly, you'll need some 1.75mm filament, any material or colour, but the accent colour tends to look best. We'll start with disassembly. Begin by removing the soldering iron from the grip. Then, with a 3mm hex, remove the two screws that hold in the base. Remember to store them somewhere safely. Next, remove the hard stop and end stop using a 2mm hex driver. Going back to the 3mm driver, remove the idlers from the idler assembly. Also remove the screws that hold the idler assembly to the extrusion. Be sure to press the nuts out from the back as you will need these for the reinstallation later. Next, we'll move on to the carriages. You'll probably need a 3mm hex driver and some sort of way to hold the nuts. For removing the arm and the grip, you'll need a 2mm driver. Make sure you get all the nuts out as these will be reused later. Most of the printed parts are not reused with the exception of the grip, so make sure you put that to one side with the new parts that you'll need for VLMP 2. For the counterweight assembly, start by removing the nut that holds everything together and keep all the washers to one side, as of course we'll be using these as our new counterweight in the new version. The long screw though, that won't be needed. Again, it's a 2mm driver to remove the counterweight holder and a 3mm driver for the wheels. Remember to remove all the little M3 nuts, as I mentioned these will be reused in the next assembly. That's pretty much it for the disassembly of the old version. Hopefully that was quite easy. You should have a nice tray of organised parts ready to assemble the next version. Now let's move on to part 2 where we can start the assembly. To start off this assembly, we're just going to use the filament and press it into the base. This should just slide in quite nicely, and there'll be a slight friction fit, which is just what we're after so that it doesn't come back out again. The best way to do this, I find, is to poke it in like most of the way, trim the end, and then use the other end to poke it in the rest of the way. This means it doesn't stick out the end at all and looks nice and clean. Alternatively, you can just sort of push it all the way in and cut it off the end, that's absolutely fine. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter too much. For the next bit, we're going to insert these trays and again use the filament and trimming method to secure them into place. Push the filament in and just trim it at both ends, I find tends to be the best solution for this. In some instances, it might be quite difficult to align the filament fully, in which case you can use some pliers or something to help you grip the filament to push it in, or just give the trays a little wiggle and you should find that everything falls into place quite nicely. If you do have trouble and need to pull the filament out, the best thing to do is push it back out using the filament from the opposite side. You can also do this if at any point you want to switch the trays or change the tray design or something like that. Next, we just continue the same sort of process, but for these two insert trays at the back. You push the filament in, trim it off, and that's all you have to do. The holes do go all the way through, so if you need to push the filament out to be able to change the trays, you can still do that, although for the filament at the front, you may need to remove the other trays first. But hopefully, this is going to be a pretty rare occurrence and you won't need to actually do it. There's one more place where we're going to be using filament, and that's for the hinges for the doors. The only downside of these is that they don't have access from both sides, so it's quite difficult to remove if you ever need to, but hopefully, again, you won't need to. If the door becomes damaged for some reason, you can just sort of break the door and then you'll be able to access the filament. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem if you need to, but it's not quite so easy to access, just so you know. Once you've got that inserted, just give the doors a quick flip just to make sure they move nice and smoothly, and they should sort of press down into place and stay shut. Next, flip the base over, and with the large washers, take 5 and put them into each of the recesses. These are a counterweight for the base to help with stability. Once you've got those in, place the screw caps over the top, and use the printed tool to help grip them and screw them into place. The screws themselves can be quite fragile, so don't over tighten them, you just want them to be flush with the top so they don't come out. Finish off the base with the sticky feet. They go into the little recesses that you'll see on the printed part. There's 6 in total. Be sure to give them a good press down to make sure they stick nice and well. That's it for the base assembly. It should not slide around as you move it on the table, and you've got a couple of doors for storing stuff underneath. With the V-slot extrusion and 2 M5x16 screws, attach the extrusion to the base through the holes in the bottom. Now let's start the carriage assembly. Place the eccentric nut onto the larger hole, and then a V-wheel and 30mm screw through the eccentric nut, and on the back side you need a washer and a nut. Finger tight for now is fine. On the other 2 holes you don't need the eccentric nut, so just the V-slot wheel, screw, washer and nylock nut. Again, just finger tight for now is fine. Repeat the process for the second carriage and it should be identical. Using a tool to grip the nuts, you can use a 3mm hex driver to tighten everything into place. You don't want to tighten the eccentric ones too much as you need them to be able to rotate, but the other ones can be tightened fully down. Obviously you don't want to over tighten them, and make sure the V-slot wheels can still rotate smoothly. At this point, the 2 carriage assemblies become slightly different. This first one is the counterweight assembly. Start by pressing the 2 screws into the back of the mount, and then the nuts into the back of the carriage. There's 3 to place, 2 go opposite one another, and the third one goes in the middle hole of the remaining 3 that go down the centre line. Place the mount onto the carriage and secure in place with 3 12mm screws. Don't fully tighten them yet as you'll need to insert the belt. For the other carriage, you need 2 nuts in the back. These are the outer holes of the 3 down the middle, and you also need to press 2 nuts into the back of the arm. This is where the grip will connect to the arm. If you have a bit of difficulty getting the nuts into place, you can push a screw through the hole, connect the nut to the screw, and then pull the screw back to pull the nut into the recess. Once you have the 2 nuts in place, you can secure the grip to the arm with the arrow pointing towards the long part of the arm, and use 2 M3x12mm screws to hold it all into place. To secure the arm to the carriage, it's another 2 M3x12mm screws. As with the other carriage, leave them a little bit loose as you need some space available to place the belt between the arm and the carriage. With the 2 carriages assembled, we can now add the belt. It's the same process for both, just press the belt into the gap and fully tighten all the screws that you previously left loose. Now we can add the counterweights. These are just large M8 washers. Place half of the stack onto each of the screws and add the nuts and caps on top. You will be able to adjust these, so there's some extra room to be able to add more or take off washers if that's what you need. This just needs to be able to counterbalance the weight of the soldering iron. We can tune this a little bit later on. With the counterweight assembly completed, you can now connect the belt to the other carriage. Just slip it between the arm and the plate, and again secure with the screws. The way I do the idler is by first creating the bearing stacks, so you have a screw and then a washer and then the two flange bearings that face each other. Then press the nuts into the back of the idler. You can use a screw to pull them through if you need. Place the screws for the extrusion into place, and then the full bearing stacks go on top. We have to put the screws in first as they can't be removed once the bearing stacks are in place. Next we can assemble the two end stops, both the hard stop and the soft one. These are just a screw, the printed part and the sliding nut. Now we can place the two end stops into the extrusion. The soft one goes at the back all the way down to the bottom and secure it into place. This one won't move. The hard stop goes in the front and is fully adjustable. For now, leave it secured right at the base. Place the two carriages onto the extrusion and adjust the eccentric nut to ensure that the carriages don't wobble, but also don't have too much friction. Screw the idler to the top of the extrusion, being sure to alternate on the screw tightening as they won't go in all the way immediately on their own, just due to the fact that they're kind of captive behind the idlers. Once installed, lift the belt up onto the idlers and position in place, ensuring that you get smooth motion of the carriages. Load the soldering iron up into the grip. As you can see, I forgot to adjust my V-slot wheels, so it doesn't work quite right. Turn on the soldering iron and set it to a temperature just above the melting temperature of your plastic, and insert the 7 heatset inserts into these parts. You want to make sure that the top of the heatset insert sits very slightly just below the surface. If you're having some problems with the V-slot wheels being too tight, you can use a 10mm spanner and adjust the eccentric nut so that the V-slot wheel just about touches the extrusion. When you've done all the heatset inserts, turn off the soldering iron and optionally remove it from the grip to make the next steps a little bit easier. Install the front of the idler using an M3 by 12mm screw, ensuring that the belt continues to move smoothly. Place the large cover over the counterweight washers and the wheel covers over the wheels opposite the counterweight, and connect them together with the long M3 by 30mm screws. Use the remaining wheel covers and hex nut covers with the M3 by 30mm screws to cover the remaining screws and nuts. Being sure to leave some slack in the cable, zip tie the cable to the top of the idler using 3 zip ties. Ensure that you retain full motion of the soldering iron. It should go all the way from the top until the tip touches the base. And then trim the ends of the zip ties with side cutters. That's it, your VLMP2 assembly is now complete. Don't forget to take advantage of the little compartment in the base to store your heatset insert tips. Congratulations on the assembly of your brand new VLMP2. I hope you enjoy using it as much as I enjoy designing it, and that you get many years of usage.